Hello, my dear friends. Come sit with me for a while. Let me share a story from my own life, one that still brings a quiet ache when I remember it. It's about the time he left me alone during my hardest battle. This wasn't a fight against another person. It was a silent struggle against something growing inside me, something that threatened to take away my strength and my tomorrows. But as I tell you this, know that it's also a story of coming through the other side. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest, where the summers stretch long and warm, and the winters cover everything in soft white snow. I met him back in college. He was studying business, and I was training to be a nurse. He was the quiet, dependable kind, the sort of man who made you feel safe just by being near. We dated for a couple of years, and then one evening by the lake, he asked me to marry him. Our wedding was simple, held in a little church with family gathered close. Everyone smiled and wished us well. We settled into a cozy house on the edge of the suburbs. He worked as an accountant at a local firm, and I took shifts at a nearby clinic. Soon our son arrived, full of energy from the moment he opened his eyes. 2 years later, our daughter came along. Those early days were busy and beautiful. Mornings meant school lunches and quick hugs at the door. Evenings were family dinners around the kitchen table, sharing stories about what happened that day. He was a wonderful father. On weekends, he'd take our son to baseball practice, cheering from the bleachers. I'd sit with our daughter, watching her brother run the bases, feeling so grateful for the life we had built. We weren't rich, but we had enough. A backyard swing set, summer barbecues with neighbors, holidays full of laughter and homemade pie. Thanksgiving was always special, with the house filled with the smell of turkey and everyone talking at once. As the years went by, the children grew up and moved out to build their own lives. Our son headed to the West Coast for college and stayed there for work. Our daughter settled closer in the city, where she started her own family. The house grew quieter, but we found our way again. We'd take Sunday drives, stop for coffee at little diners, dream about traveling one day, maybe seeing the Grand Canyon or visiting the grandchildren more often. After 30 years together, I truly believed nothing could break us. Then the tiredness began. At first, I thought it was just age. I was in my mid-50s by then. But the exhaustion settled deep, and I started losing weight without meaning to. There were aches I couldn't explain. I went to the doctor a few times on my own because he was busy at the office. When the tests showed something wrong, more appointments followed. That's when I told him. He came with me to the important one, the day everything changed. We sat in a plain office with soft lighting and health posters on the walls. The doctor spoke gently but clearly. It was breast cancer, caught early, stage 2. Surgery and chemotherapy would give me a strong chance. He held my hand, but it felt light, almost distant. I asked questions, trying to stay calm. On the drive home, rain tapped against the windows of our SUV. Traffic moved slowly. I stared out at the wet highway, letting the news sink in. That night I made a simple dinner, chicken and roasted vegetables, the way we always liked it. We sat across from each other. "We'll get through this," I said quietly. He nodded. "Yes, we will." But his eyes carried worry. We ate mostly in silence, the sound of forks against plates filling the room. The surgery was scheduled a few weeks later. In the days leading up, I told the children. Our son called immediately, promising to fly home soon. Our daughter came over that weekend with the grandchildren, and we spent the day baking cookies, keeping things as normal as possible. He was there, but he seemed far away, checking his phone more than usual. The morning of the surgery, he drove me to the hospital. We held hands in the waiting area. When they called my name, he kissed my forehead and said he loved me. I smiled through my nerves. When I woke up afterwards, sore and groggy, he was sitting beside the bed with a small bouquet from the store. "It went well," he whispered. "They got it all." Tears came then, from relief, from fear, from everything. He stayed that day and the next, bringing magazines and soup. Coming home felt strange. The house looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. I rested on the couch, watching the fall leaves drift past the window. Chemotherapy started soon after. That's when the real challenge began. The first treatment took place in a large room filled with recliners and kind nurses. He sat beside me while the medicine dripped slowly into my arm. "How are you holding up?" he asked partway through. "So far, so good," I replied. But that evening, the sickness hit hard. I spent hours feeling weak and unwell, barely able to keep anything down. The days after blurred together. My hair began to thin. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing gently, watching strands fall into the sink. It felt like losing a part of who I was. At first, he helped. He'd run to the store for ginger tea or plain crackers, anything to ease the nausea. "You're strong," he'd say. But I could see the strain in his face. Work was demanding, he explained. Year-end reports, tight deadlines. He started staying later at the office. Our daughter visited often. She'd bring homemade casseroles or just sit with me, holding my hand through the rough moments. The grandchildren drew colorful pictures that we taped to the refrigerator. Our son called regularly, checking in, wishing he lived closer. As the weeks turned into months, the side effects grew heavier. Deep fatigue that pinned me to the bed, mouth sores that made eating painful, more weight loss. Neighbors and church friends organized meals and sent cards. It helped so much, but the quiet hours alone were the hardest. Lying still, staring at the ceiling, wondering how to keep going. He still tried in the beginning. He'd make breakfast before leaving or heat soup in the evening. But slowly the late nights increased. He'd come home after I was already resting. I'd wait up sometimes, wrapped in a blanket on the couch. "Rough day?" I'd ask. "Yeah, busy," he'd answer, heading to watch TV. We talked less about what I was going through. The questions about how I felt became shorter, almost routine. One afternoon, after a difficult session, I called him at work. My voice was shaky. "Could you pick up my prescription on the way home?" "Of course," he said. But he forgot. I didn't bring it up. I knew he was carrying worry too, even if he didn't say it. The children started to notice. Our daughter mentioned it gently. "He seems distant lately." I brushed it off. Work is stressful for him. But inside, I felt the space between us growing. He stopped coming to most appointments, saying he couldn't take more time off. Our daughter or a friend would go with me instead. The holidays arrived. Thanksgiving that year was hard. I was midway through treatment and felt worn thin. Our daughter hosted at her home in the city. The table was full: turkey, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, grandchildren laughing and running around. I smiled and joined in, but inside I felt fragile. He talked football with our son-in-law, but barely looked over at me. That night, driving home, I said, "It was nice to be together." He agreed quietly. Then he went to bed early. I sat up alone with a cup of tea, watching the streetlights through the window, wondering where we were drifting. Winter settled in, blanketing everything in snow. I bundled up for appointments, the cold sharp against my skin. My hair was completely gone now. I wore soft hats indoors and a wig when I went out. People were kind, but some stares reminded me how different I looked. His late evenings became the norm. He'd come home tired, sometimes smelling faintly of a scent that wasn't mine. I pushed the thought away, telling myself it was nothing, but doubt started to settle in, quiet and heavy. Spring finally arrived, melting the snow and bringing the first hints of green back to the yard. Tiny buds appeared on the trees, and the air carried that fresh, hopeful smell after a long winter. But inside our home, things felt colder than ever. The treatments continued without mercy, each one leaving me weaker than the last. Many days I stayed in bed with the curtains half drawn, letting soft light filter in while I rested and waited for the waves of nausea or bone-deep tiredness to pass. Some mornings I'd manage to get up and make coffee, but by afternoon I'd be back under the covers, listening to the quiet hum of the house. He began taking more short work trips, just overnight conferences or client meetings out of state. At first, it was once a month, then every couple of weeks. I'd manage on my own or with help from our daughter. She'd come stay overnight when she could, bringing groceries, making simple meals like chicken soup or macaroni and cheese, the kind of comfort food that settled easier on my stomach. We'd sit together in the evening, watching old shows on TV or just talking about the grandchildren. "Where is he really going on these trips?" she asked one night, her voice gentle but worried. I didn't have an answer. I told myself it was truly work. After all, bills were piling up. Medical costs, even with insurance, were more than we'd ever imagined. When he came back from those trips, he seemed even farther away than before. He'd unpack his suitcase quickly, always checking his phone, smiling at messages I couldn't see. He'd head straight to his home office and close the door, saying he had emails to catch up on. I'd sit in the living room, wrapped in my favorite soft blanket, listening to the faint tapping of his keyboard through the wall. Some nights I'd fall asleep on the couch waiting for him to come out and sit with me, even for a little while. I caught glimpses of things that made my heart sink. One evening, the phone lit up on the counter while he was in the shower, a text notification from a name I didn't recognize, a woman's name. The preview said something simple like, "Can't wait to see you again." I didn't touch the phone. I couldn't bring myself to snoop. But the words stayed with me all night. The next morning, I asked calmly, "Who's messaging you so late?" He barely looked up from his coffee. "Just someone from the office, work stuff." His voice was flat, like he'd practiced the answer. I nodded and let it go. I was too tired for confrontation, too focused on simply getting through another day. The grandchildren still visited when they could, and those days were bright spots in the fog. The youngest would climb onto the bed with his coloring book and crayons, drawing superheroes and rainbows. "This one's you, Grandma," he'd say proudly, pointing to a figure with a cape. "You're fighting the bad guys and winning." I'd hold that picture close on the hardest days, taping it to the bedroom wall where I could see it from the pillow. Their hugs, their sticky little hands in mine, their laughter echoing through the hallway, it all reminded me why I had to keep going. After one particularly rough treatment, the sickness hit harder than ever. I spent 2 full days barely able to lift my head. Everything ached. Even water tasted wrong. I called him mid-afternoon, my voice weak and trembling. "Please come home early if you can. I really need you today." There was a long pause on the line, voices in the background. "I've got a meeting that's running long. I'll try to wrap up soon." Our daughter came instead, bringing ginger ale and saltine crackers, sitting with me until evening. That night, lying alone in the dim room, listening to the clock tick, I felt the full weight of everything pressing down, how much I was carrying by myself. Friends from church and the neighborhood kept asking how he was coping. They'd bring casseroles or cards and always say, "Tell him we're praying for both of you." I'd smile and say he was doing okay, that work was keeping him busy. But inside, a quiet resentment began to grow. This was the part of our vows we never thought we'd have to live out, in sickness and in health. I had always pictured us facing something like this together, the way we'd faced everything else. Why couldn't he sit beside me, hold my hand, just be present? Summer finally came, warm and golden. The flowers I'd planted years ago bloomed along the fence, bright petunias and tall sunflowers swaying in the breeze. When I felt strong enough, I'd sit on the porch in the late afternoon, letting the sun warm my face. He mowed the lawn one Saturday, the smell of fresh-cut grass drifting through the open windows. We waved at each other across the yard, but we barely spoke. Our evening walks, the ones we used to take hand in hand around the block, had stopped long ago. Then came the small argument that felt like the crack that finally broke something open. It started for nothing, really. I'd tried to make dinner but lost track of time resting, and everything burned. The smoke alarm beeped, and he came into the kitchen frustrated. "Can't you pay a little more attention?" The words came out sharper than usual. I stood there holding the ruined pan, tears starting without warning. "I'm doing the best I can while I'm sick. Some days I can barely stand up." He apologized right away, rubbing his forehead like he had a headache. "I know, I'm sorry, I'm tired too." But the words hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. A few days later, while doing laundry, I found a receipt tucked in his jacket pocket. Dinner for two at a nice Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place we used to go for anniversaries. My heart sank slowly, like a stone dropping into deep water. That evening, I waited until we were both in the living room. The TV was off for once. "We need to talk," I said softly. He looked up, weary. Before I could ask about the receipt, he spoke first. "There's someone else. It started a few months ago. I felt so overwhelmed watching you go through this. I didn't know how to handle it. She makes things feel lighter, easier." The room seemed to tilt for a moment. I sat very still, letting the words settle. "While I've been fighting for my life?" My voice stayed calm, almost distant, like it belonged to someone else. He nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. "I couldn't cope. I know it's selfish." The silence stretched long after that. Rain started tapping against the windows again, soft and steady. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg him to stay. I just felt a deep, hollow sadness wash over me. "Then go," I said quietly, "if that's what you need." He sat there long time, then slowly stood and went to the bedroom. I heard the zipper of a suitcase, the quiet closing of drawers. He packed only what he needed for now. Before he left, he stood in the doorway. "I'll help with the bills. I'm sorry." The front door closed softly behind him, and the silence rushed in like cold night air. With him gone, the house felt bigger and emptier than I could have imagined. Every room carried memories, 30 years of laughter, arguments, quiet mornings with coffee, holidays with the kids running through the halls. Now it was just me and the echoes. The first few nights, I left the TV on low for company, some old sitcom with canned laughter that felt strange in the quiet. I changed the locks a week later, not because I was afraid he'd come back unannounced, but because it felt like marking a new chapter, drawing a line. The final rounds of treatment came soon after he left. I went to those appointments with our daughter or a close friend from church. The nurses asked where he was. I just smiled and said he was busy. The last session felt both endless and like a finish line. When the doctor called a few weeks later with the results, "You're in remission," relief flooded through me so strongly I had to sit down. I cried happy tears for the first time in months, but the joy was mixed with deep grief for the marriage that hadn't survived the storm. Our daughter moved in for several weeks to help me through recovery. We spent evenings sorting through closets, boxing up his clothes for donation, carefully packing away old photo albums. Some pictures we kept out, the ones with the children and grandchildren, because those memories were still mine, too. "You're stronger than you know, Mom," she kept saying as we folded sweaters and ties he'd never wear here again. Our son flew home as soon as he heard about the separation and stayed for 10 days. He fixed little things around the house, a leaky faucet, the loose porch step, things his dad used to handle without being asked. The grandchildren's visits became more frequent, and their energy slowly filled the empty spaces. We baked chocolate chip cookies together, played board games at the kitchen table, read stories on the couch under a big quilt. Their laughter bounced off the walls again, and it healed something in me each time. One evening, the youngest fell asleep against my shoulder while we watched a cartoon. I sat there for a long time, just feeling his small, warm weight, grateful for the love that hadn't left. I joined a support group at the cancer center. Once a week, women of all ages sitting in a circle sharing what the journey had taken and what it had given. Several had stories like mine, partners who couldn't stay through the illness. Hearing them speak gave me permission to feel the hurt without shame. I wasn't alone in this particular kind of loss. We cried together sometimes, laughed at dark jokes only we understood, and celebrated every clean scan. He called now and then to ask how I was feeling, to check if the bills were covered. The conversations were short, careful, like walking on thin ice. I kept my answers polite but brief. Months later, the divorce papers arrived in the mail. Reading them in the quiet kitchen, I felt another wave of sadness, not just for the end, but for the life we'd planned that would never be. I signed where I was supposed to, kept the house, divided the savings fairly. It felt final, like closing a very long chapter. My hair grew back slowly, soft, curly, and mostly gray now. I laughed the first time I looked in the mirror and saw the new texture. It felt like a badge of survival. I started gentle daily walks around the neighborhood each morning, waving at neighbors who'd brought meals during the hardest months. I rejoined the book club at the local library, discussing stories with women who'd become friends over the years. Little by little, life opened up again in small, ordinary ways. Coffee on the porch, watching birds at the feeder, planting new flowers along the walkway, cooking meals just for one without feeling lonely. One quiet afternoon, about a year later, he appeared at the front door with a small bouquet of grocery store flowers. He asked if we could talk. He looked older, thinner, worn around the eyes. Over coffee at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, he told me the other relationship had ended. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," he said, voice breaking. "I was scared and selfish. I thought leaving would make the pain stop, but it only made everything worse." I listened without interrupting, letting him say what he needed to say. When he finished, I spoke gently. "I've forgiven you, not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger was too heavy, but we can't go back. Too much has changed." He nodded, eyes wet, and left quietly. That was our last real conversation. Years have passed now, and I'm truly okay. Healthier than I've been in a long time. Regular checkups bring good news every time. The children and grandchildren are close. We gather often for holidays, birthdays, and simple Sunday dinners that stretch long into the evening with stories and laughter. The house feels full again when they're here. Shoes piled by the door, toys scattered across the living room, the smell of roasting chicken drifting from the oven. And when they leave, the quiet doesn't feel lonely anymore. It feels peaceful. The garden blooms more beautifully each spring than the year before. I spend hours out there on warm days, pruning roses, planting new perennials, watching butterflies move from flower to flower. It's become my quiet therapy, hands in the soil, feeling life come back season after season. Looking back on that hardest battle, I see how much it taught me. Things I never wanted to learn, but am grateful for now. It showed me the depth of my own strength, the kind that grows quietly when you have no choice but to keep going. It reminded me that the love of children and grandchildren is steady and fierce. It doesn't waver when life gets hard. And perhaps most importantly, it taught me to cherish my own company, to be gentle with myself on days when memories still ache. Some people simply can't stay through the darkest storms. That's painful to accept, but it's their limitation, not a reflection of your worth. When one door closes, and sometimes it slams shut, other doors open, often to parts of yourself you never knew existed. I've discovered new hobbies, deeper friendships, a quieter but richer kind of joy in everyday moments. Morning coffee on the porch as the sun rises, the sound of wind chimes on a summer evening, the way the grandchildren run to me with open arms. If you're listening tonight and facing something similar, serious illness, betrayal, abandonment, or any kind of deep loss, please hear this from someone who's walked that road. You are enough, just as you are. You will find your way through, one slow day at a time. The rain always stops eventually. The clouds part, and you learn to bloom again, maybe in ways you never imagined, maybe even more beautifully than before. Thank you for sitting with me and listening to my story. Hold your loved ones close tonight. Be kind to your own heart. It's been through more than you realize. Life is precious, and so are you. Take care, my dear friends. Goodbye.